Welcome along, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us at the end of a school day. If you've been in school today, I hope it's been a good one, nearly towards the end of the week. So this session is all about how to be a maths lead. Now, obviously, probably not going to be able to cover every aspect of it in the next hour, but I hope that it will give you a good overview of how to get started, really. I titled it Support for New Maths Leads, but its content is probably relevant as well if you're just new to the role or returning to being a maths lead. So we will get started. Just a little bit about my background. I am the National Education Lead for Primary Maths here at Twinkl. I've got about 18 years experience in education, started very briefly in secondary and then moved over to primary, where I spent most of my career as a assistant head teacher and a maths lead. I was maths lead, made maths lead rather than applied for it. I don't know how many of you were sort of had this foisted upon you or have seen this as a career choice, but I was made maths lead in my second year of teaching and kept that role all the way through, really, across multiple schools. As part of that, I also undertook the maths specialist teacher qualification with the University of Northampton, and then went on to become a primary mastery specialist with the Maths Hubs and the NCTM. Did a couple of other accreditations with them, including School Development Lead and PD Lead. I also led Maths Across a Trust here in Derbyshire. And now I spend a lot of time speaking at conferences, leading PD all about maths. And obviously recently started as the National Education Lead for Primary Maths at Twinkl. All of that to say that I spend my life thinking and talking about maths, but when I was at school, it was possibly one of my least favourite subjects. So if you happen to be sitting here thinking, I've been given the role of maths lead and it's not a subject that I loved at school, don't worry. That was certainly me when I started teaching. If you'd have told me at 16, after I just finished my maths GCSE, when I was determined that I would never be doing any maths ever again, that I would spend the rest of my career thinking and talking about maths, I think I'd have laughed at you. So it's funny how these things progress, but I found maths much easier to teach than I did English, for example, which English I thought would be my subject because I thought I understood it. But actually, I realised that with English, I knew to put a full stop at the end of a sentence. I didn't really know why it went there, and so I found that quite hard to explain. I just sort of instinctively knew that. Whereas with maths, I really had to learn it alongside the children a little bit. And I think eventually, maybe not at the start, but eventually that possibly made me a better maths teacher. So just bear that in mind as you're going through with the teachers that you work with and things. Not everybody will necessarily feel comfortable and confident with maths, but they can still be fantastic maths teachers and obviously have quite a career in the subject. So for the aims of today's session, hopefully by the end of the session, you'll feel clearer about what the role of maths lead actually involves. Hopefully you'll know where to start and what to not rush into. I'm going to try and give you an overview of the key areas, including curriculum, pedagogy, staff support, monitoring, and Ofsted. We'll whisper it at this point. Have practical tools for action planning and time management, and know where to go for resources, networks, and ongoing support. So, why does maths matter? This is one of my favourite quotes. I use it at quite a lot of professional development things. So if you've seen me anywhere before, you might have seen it before. And it just says, those who assert that they can't do maths, and you possibly will hear people say these things, generally they have had a mathematical inferiority complex foisted onto them by the type of teaching they had to endure at school. I like that word, endure. Really, the thing that I love most about this quote, it's possibly not surprising, I suppose, but it's saying that people who say that they don't like maths, normally that has been something that they have come to the conclusion of by having maths lessons at school. So we know that maths lessons can shape how somebody feels about themselves as a mathematician and how they, whether they're confident in the subject or not. The thing that I love most about this quote, though, is that it is from 1941. So this is not a new phenomenon. We're not, we're not rewriting the rule book here. We know that maths teaching has had an effect on people's confidence and people's feelings about their own self-worth when it comes to maths for a very, very long time, getting up for 100 years or more, and possibly further back than 1941 as well. So you are not the first people to be tackling this challenge, but I hope that the work that has been going on in maths education for the last 10 years or more across the country has begun to have a bit of an impact with that. And you are in the privileged position as maths leads to be able to steer that even further now. Ultimately, we learn maths because it helps us to solve problems and explain the world around us. That's what we want children to be able to do, certainly by the time they leave primary school and begin their secondary education. If they're really good problem solvers and can reason and have fluency, then I think they're in a good place to be able to use maths in their life. So you are a primary maths lead. What does that involve? Well, this is not a definitive list by any means, and it's probably the expectations are going to be different depending on whether you're in a trust or an LEA, or what your head teacher and SLT expect from you as a maths lead in your school. But as I was jotting this down, I'll try to cover some of the broad categories really. So you are probably going to be responsible for leading, or at least pointing your colleagues in the direction of shaping your school's vision for teaching and learning in maths. The first piece of advice I would probably give from my experience is that this is a collaborative activity really. It's not something that you can just tell people this is what our vision and strategy is going to be for teaching and learning in maths. It's something that you need to shape alongside your colleagues and make sure they have ownership of. Whilst you're doing that, you'll probably have to align with the whole school priorities. Maths might not be on your school improvement plan for this year, and so you might be fighting for resources and time to implement the changes that you ultimately decide that you want to implement. You'll also probably have to keep an eye on the national curriculum in whichever country you are working in, and more on that in a few moments. As maths lead, you are probably going to be taking the lead on improving teaching and learning in maths. And that might involve supporting colleagues through helping them to access CPD, coaching and sharing best practice. That isn't to say that you have to see yourself as the oracle at this point in time, but more as a conduit or somebody who can facilitate helping your staff to access this CPD and possibly arrange coaching or opportunities to see best practice, even if that's not you at this point in time. You might also be asked to monitor maths provision, and I'll take you through some ways that you might do that effectively in this session. On the back of that, it's likely that you'll be asked to create an action plan, which you may have done before for other subjects, but we'll talk about how you can do that effectively in maths, and also track progress and evidence impact on pupil outcomes. I mean, that's why we're doing this job ultimately, isn't it? To make sure that the best outcomes are achieved by the pupils. All of this is made easier if you can help to shape a maths culture at your school, and that means being enthusiastic and promoting enthusiasm for maths, having high expectations of pupils and colleagues, and building confidence again in pupils and colleagues in maths. You'll also be expected to connect with wider stakeholders as well, including parents and governors and the wider maths community. And I will share a couple of tips on connecting with parents later in this session. So, getting started, start of a new year, start of a new role potentially. What should you do first? Well, my advice is to do nothing. Don't do anything yet. Certainly not in terms of implementing any change or anything like that. The first task really is to decide what's happening right now, get to know the school. It could be that this is a new school for you, or it could just be that you are in a new role within a school that you're already familiar with. Either way, I would spend the first chunk of your time as subject lead observing, listening, gathering information. You may have been told by your head teacher or the members of SLT or an external school improvement officer that you need to fix X, Y, or Z. That may well be true, but as we'll discover, the best way to do that is to really understand it first. So we're going to start by asking questions and looking at some monitoring and things and seeing what we can understand about where the school is at right now before we jump in and try to fix things. Because teachers, we know we're all busy. We don't have a lot of time to implement things that ultimately might not be the most effective. So it's all about making sure that the things that we're going to try and implement are the best practice. And to do that, we need to make sure we're doing the right things, which comes back to this question of why again. So we need to find your why, your school's why. So before doing anything, as I was saying, it's important to ascertain why you are doing it. Whether you're new to school or simply new to the role, you probably already have ideas about what you want to change, but we will cover how to explore this. Simon Sinek says in his book, Begin With Why, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And so in order to have credibility with your colleagues that you're going to be working with, you need to be able to explain why you are asking them to do what you are going to ask them to do. And that's why we need to spend the time finding that out really and being really clear on what we're doing and why we're doing it. When you've got this, that can form the vision or the basis for the vision that you will have for maths at your school that you can begin to further shape with your colleagues and staff. So what makes a good mathematician? This is something that I started doing every year with staff. At the start of every year, we would come back to this and try and decide what makes a good mathematician. So I'm going to give you just a minute, really, just to have a think. You can jot down some ideas if you want to. I'm not going to ask you to share them, but what qualities and traits makes a good mathematician in your view? Just have a little think about that, and then I'll share what typically comes up in these sessions. So when I did this with some skit trainees last week, they came up with a very similar list to the ones that staff usually come up with when I run this session. Interestingly, it very rarely has much to do with being able to do calculations quickly in your head or using a formal written method for things. It tends to be qualities and traits such as being a good problem solver, having resilience or being able to persevere when things don't immediately go as you hope they might do. Being confident in maths and being able to talk confidently about it. Being curious and willing to find out things. Having the ability to reason about what you're doing and know why you're doing it. Having a positive attitude about maths. Having the vocabulary to be able to talk about what you know and what you're thinking. And being willing to make mistakes and try again. And then fluency is the other thing that often comes up when we talk about what makes a good mathematician. I think part of your job as maths leads is to see whether your staff agree with these sorts of traits. Maybe you've come up with some different ones in your school, in your context. These tend to be the sort of typical ones, really. As part of thinking about what makes a good mathematician, we can then start to shape what do we need to do to be able to enable our children to develop these qualities, because they're not innate qualities. They are things that can be developed and improved upon over time. And certainly, as the quote that I showed you earlier alludes to, the lessons and the time that children spend in school has the biggest impact, really, outside of their parents, on whether they are good problem solvers, whether they have a positive attitude towards maths, whether they are confident, whether they feel that they can make mistakes. So identifying these traits, talking them through with the staff at your school, and thinking, what can we do in our lessons, in our classrooms, to make sure we've got a culture at our school that enables children to develop these qualities that we all agree are the foundations of good mathematicians, and probably just the foundations of good learners, to be honest, across different subjects. You'll also have to contend, of course, with the maths curriculum. Now, you might be joining us from a school outside of England. If you are in England, then we have the national curriculum that was last updated in 2014. There's obviously a curriculum and assessment review going on at the moment, which is due to make some recommendations at any time now. But I'd be very surprised if we move away from the core themes in the English national curriculum of fluency, reasoning, and problem solving. In Scotland, there's the Curriculum for Excellence, of course, and that focuses on experiences and outcomes and numeracy across learning. And in Wales, they've got the Curriculum for Wales, which came into force just a couple of years ago. And mathematics and numeracy is seen as a cross-curricular area of learning and experience in Wales. However, whichever curriculum you might be following, or if you're in a MAT, you might not have to follow any of these, although typically I think most schools still do. There are shared principles regardless of the exact curriculum that you are following. And those shared principles typically are that we expect children to develop number sense and conceptual understanding, i.e. moving beyond just procedural knowledge and being able to use column methods and procedures to solve simple problems, to actually understanding fundamentally the structure of the maths and a deeper understanding rather than that superficial procedural understanding. To help support that, most of these curricula implicitly, I would say, suggest that you should adopt a concrete, pictorial and abstract approach. Now, I've very intentionally put some two-way arrows in that diagram because there is sometimes a little bit of a misconception that it's a hierarchy of moving from concrete manipulatives and doing things with manipulatives to pictorial representations where we might draw things out, we use bar models or part whole models, etc., to then moving on to the abstract and just using an equation or a formal written method, as if the abstract is the best, the ultimate skill that we're seeking to achieve. That isn't necessarily true at all. And actually there's lots of times where we may already have those abstract skills, but we still want to go back and use some concrete materials to demonstrate our reasoning or to extend our understanding a little bit. And you'll often come across children, of course, who are very capable of using a written method to solve a problem, but are not able to articulate or draw out why that method works or how they've actually arrived at that. So that goes back to that conceptual understanding, and being able to use a pictorial representation of the mathematics can help those children to be able to explain their thinking. So concrete, pictorial, abstract, definitely part of our pedagogical principles for deepening understanding in maths, but don't see it as a one-way street from concrete through to abstract. Really, we should be thinking about it as something that can be moved backwards and forwards along. Hopefully, whichever curricula you're following, you'll be thinking that embedding mathematical talk and reasoning is fundamental to developing children as good mathematicians. And all the work that's going on around oracy at the moment, I think, is particularly relevant to maths as much as it is to any other subject. Ultimately, what we're hoping to do is to prepare our pupils for confident use of maths in their life and in their learning. It's not just about having life skills. We also want to, open doors for children so that they can explore maths beyond just the skills that they might need every day, and really expose them to all the wonderful things that you can do with maths and the way that we can use maths to explain the world around us. In terms of pedagogy, I think some of these are fairly self-explanatory, but just bearing in mind that we are teaching for understanding, we want to build secure number sense and connections. Again, we can do that using a CPA approach. Mathematical talk, as I've just mentioned. In lessons, we should be encouraging reasoning through purposeful discussion. So giving children STEM sentences and modeling using correct vocabulary and encouraging children to answer in full sentences are all those sorts of ways that we can develop mathematical talk in our lessons. Valuing mistakes as learning opportunities, not just dismissing an incorrect answer, but actually thinking, what does that tell me about a child's understanding, and how can we begin to impact that a little further? Careful task design, small steps in progression, and providing both scaffold to try and help all children to access the learning, but also additional challenge if a child is accessing that learning at a good standard already. So being able to, we used to talk a lot about differentiation. This is differentiation by another means, I suppose, but really thinking we want all these children to get to the same point by the end of the year. How can we scaffold learning to make sure that everybody can access it, whether you are a child with additional educational needs or whether you are somebody who is flying through the learning and needs some additional challenge. There should be things in place to support both those groups of children. And also bearing in mind that those groups of children are not set or predetermined, and that actually groups change depending on the lesson and depending on the children. Fluency and problem solving, there should be a balance between recall when we're thinking about fluency, recall and flexibility and application. So fluency isn't just about knowing number bonds and times tables, it's also about developing a flexibility in how those things are used and the way that we approach problem solving. And planning for problem solving explicitly, not just teaching through problem solving, but also teaching the skills of problem solving. It's one of the core principles of the English national curriculum, certainly. And making sure that all children have access to problem solving and opportunities, I suppose. One or two of the schemes, if you happen to be using a scheme in your school, as a maths lead, just to be aware of, one or two of the schemes leave all the problem solving to the end of the lesson. Some children may never get onto those problems. So be aware of that. We want equity in terms of access to our learning. So there may need to be some adjustments made if you are using one of those schemes. And as I was just mentioning, ensuring that all children have access to rich mathematical experiences and adaptations are in place for diverse needs and contexts. So we are at the start of a new year, although it may feel like you've been back at school for a long time already. But for me, whether I was supporting maths leads in a school that I was unfamiliar with or whether they were new to role, we always started with this gather phase or explore phase, really. And this is a really important stage in really beginning to formulate a plan for how you want to be a maths lead and what you want to implement in your school. As part of this phase, I've said here, informal conversations in the corridor and the staff room are often a great place to start. So if you are new to the school, you may not have had much opportunity to do this yet, but I always find that just chatting in corridors and in staff rooms and in classrooms after school, I was always one for walking around after school and just popping in and having a chat with people and seeing how their lessons had gone that day. not an interrogation, just a friendly chat and see whether I could support them in any way. But this is often where you will learn the most, really, about how people feel about maths teaching in your school, and what the barriers might be for children and for staff. However, outside of those, other activities that you might want to do during this phase are staff surveys, pupil voice, learning walks, data analysis, and book looks. I'm sure none of those will be unfamiliar to any of you who've been in education for any length of time. But also at this point, consider your own strengths and areas to develop as a maths lead. For me, it was EYFS, because I'd spent a lot of my career teaching in year 5 and year 6, mostly in year 6. So EYFS was like a foreign land to me, at the other end of the school, behind a door, that I didn't venture through very often. So I knew as a maths lead, I really needed to brush up on my understanding of what happened in reception and in nursery. So I made sure that I booked some time to go and spend in there, and work with the EYFS lead and learn more about it. For you, it might be pedagogy, it might be the curriculum, it might be year 6. Just take some time to think about what your own areas for development are, what you want to brush up on, what you want to learn a little more about, and make sure that you build that into your action plan as well. Just a note on schemes before we go any further. Schemes of work are a starting point for planning for your staff, not a replacement for it. Unfortunately, we still see that quite a lot, that schemes are just used verbatim as they are. I would encourage you as maths leads just to look at how staff are using a scheme, if you have one in your school, and making sure that they are used as a starting point, a really, really good, high quality starting point, but still just a starting point. You know, the people who've written these schemes don't know the children in your class, they don't know the children in your school or their context or their starting points, but you do as the class teacher. So it's really your responsibility to take that scheme, that lesson, and really make it your own. No scheme is perfect either. Everybody will have their own likes and dislikes about any particular scheme. And sometimes it seems like changing the scheme is the answer to all the problems that you might have in terms of maths attainment or maths outcomes in your school. It might be, it might not be. It might just be the way that the scheme is being used in your school at the moment, or it might be something totally different. So it's easy to blame the scheme. It's often the first thing that somebody wants to change. But as I've said, remember your why, remember what you found out from your gather phase, and see whether that really supports what you want to do. Just bear in mind that changing schemes can be a big task, a lot of work for teachers, and implementing a scheme effectively can take months or even years. So it's not a quick fix by any means. It might be something that you decide to do, but if you do decide to do it, just make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons, I guess. So, data analysis, the most fun part of any maths lead's role. We do have at Twinkl some proformas that can help you with this. I'll share those in the email that you'll get at the end following this session. But you may have within your school something that does something very similar, or you can certainly make your own. Just a bit of a note on data analysis then. It is important to look at the data, but just bear in mind that it is historic data now. Okay, any data point is just a moment in time, and it doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. Definitely analyze groups, look for patterns across key stages as well. This document here breaks down the groups for you into girls, boys, SEND, disadvantaged, EAL. You might want to break those down even further though, depending on your school and your context. But certainly looking for patterns across key stages is really important. Typically, it is not unusual to see a bit of a dip in attainment in year 3 or even in year 1 as children move from one key stage to another. That seems to be nationally anecdotally quite a common pattern. So don't necessarily assume that there's a huge problem if you see a dip in attainment in those year groups. Also bear in mind that it's not uncommon to see a dip in attainment at the start of the year either, as children get to learn more about their new teacher and feel comfortable. The teacher gets to know them. It's not unusual really to see that slight dip in attainment there. As I mentioned, remember that data reflects a moment in time and that it is also cohort specific. So it's really important to look back at a particular year group and track their progress over time as well, because it might look like there's a problem with year 4 and maybe it's the teaching in year 4, but actually it could just be that it's that cohort that are historically have been a little bit lower in attainment, and therefore you need to bear that in mind before jumping to any conclusions. So when you are looking at data, whatever system you've got for looking at that data, try and make sure that you've got access to previous years as well, so that you can look back across that and see what those are. Trends are much more useful for you as subject leaders than individual test scores are. We hope that the teachers are using those individual test scores, if you do tests in your school, to help put into place interventions and things. That's not necessarily your role. But looking at those trends, that certainly is your role, and hopefully that will give you some insight into what is happening over time in your school. Use data to raise questions rather than to draw conclusions. So again, look at those trends, see what you notice, and on the back of that, begin to raise some questions, things that you might want to find out a little bit more about, and use those as lines of inquiry for the rest of your monitoring, if that makes sense. So I would always start with the data, remembering that it's just a moment in time, making sure I've tracked back to look at progress over time and things, and then I would generate some lines of inquiry from that data that I want to find out a little bit more about when I'm doing my other monitoring tasks. Essentially, so what? You've got this set of data. What does it tell you? What are the questions that it raises? That's the important bit. Hopefully what you will start to do through these monitoring activities is build up a little bit of a picture of maths in your school, across your school. Again, here is from Twinkl a sheet that you can take and adapt and make your own, and begin to fill in, from the data, what have you noticed about assessment? What have you noticed about pupils? What have you noticed about teaching? You can begin to raise these questions on here. It's really handy, especially if you do have any external visitors come to school, whether that's Ofsted or anybody else. It's really handy to have a vision of maths on a page for your school. And through these monitoring activities, you can be able to build that up so that you've got this as a reference point. It can also be shared with staff and with governors and things. And I used to begin a new one of these every year in my role as a maths lead, just so that I wasn't, this is a working document rather than something that is fixed and concrete and static. This is likely to change a little bit as we go through your role as a maths lead. Learning walks are another popular monitoring activity. I'm sure we've all been subjected to them. Just remember that it is not performance management. It's probably not your role. I mean, it might be, but from a maths point of view, the purpose isn't for performance management. That's not why we're in somebody's classroom. Have a line of inquiry from the data. Take that in with you. A good one to start with might be lesson design. How is the structure of the lesson supporting all pupils? Can you see that in the session? Focus on what the pupils are doing rather than what the teacher is doing, because you'll learn a lot more generally from that. Have some focus pupils already written down for you to check on in each class, identified from your data analysis. So if you've identified that girls are outperforming boys in year 2, for instance, then it might be, okay, I'm going to look at these particular girls who are booking that trend, or these particular boys that are booking that trend, and see what they're doing in the lesson, see if it's anything different from their peers. While you are there, have a look in books and speak to pupils. We're going to talk about book looks and pupil voice, but this is possibly one of the easiest times to get it. We know that as subject leads, you may not be given a lot of time to do this role. So you really do need to box a little bit clever, and make sure that you are taking all the opportunities. If you've been given a couple of hours in the morning to do a learning walk, then I would be trying to get the book looks done quickly in that time as well, just as you're going round. It doesn't have to be a huge written document. And also speaking to the pupils, that is your pupil voice. That's your opportunity for pupil voice as well. The added benefit of this is that it can feel a little bit less onerous on teachers than if one week you're going in for a learning walk, the next week you're then asking them for books, the week after that you're asking them for pupils so that you can speak to them. We all know that that can feel a little bit intimidating at times, potentially. So getting it all out of the way in one go will, I think, make you a little bit more popular amongst staff. At this stage, don't worry about the details unless you can see that there's a problem that's impacting pupils. And be prepared to give some general, hopefully positive feedback to staff later. Really try and focus on the positives, really. And then anything that you want to work on is a question for you, unless it's something really specific to that teacher. Then it might just be feeding into your whole school maths action plan a little later. When you are doing the book looks or work scrutiny, try to get a picture really of whether there's consistent approaches within the class and then across the school. That's what you're looking for in the book looks. Do all pupils have the opportunity to solve problems, for instance, or is that just one group who's working more quickly than the others? Is there evidence of reasoning coming through in the books? Are the pictorial representations consistent? Do they build up as you move through the school? If bar models are introduced in year 2, are they still being used in year 6? And is there evidence of support for those who need it? This is one of the questions that you are most likely to be asked. If you do have an external visitor come to school, it will almost certainly be a line of inquiry for them. And what they'll want to know is what provision is there to ensure that there's inclusion and equity in maths lessons. So are pupils with SEND able to access the learning? What's being put into place to make sure that that's the case for them? When you're talking to pupils and staff, make it your mission to really find out what they think of maths at your school. Make sure you speak to a range of pupils and a range of staff, so TAs and other adults working in school, as well as pupils. As I mentioned before, those informal discussions that you have as part of a learning walk can often be much more valuable. Children feel more comfortable sat in their class than they do if you drag them out to a library with their maths book and ask them to sit in a circle and talk to you about maths. They're much more likely to talk to you openly and honestly when they're in their classroom, feeling secure, feeling comfortable, feeling safe, and not feeling like they're being interrogated. So I always found that pupil voice was much better to get at an opportune moment in a learning walk than it was elsewhere. Staff subject knowledge surveys can be helpful, definitely, but be aware of not overburdening staff, particularly at this time of year. Everybody's sending out surveys and things, potentially other subject leads as well, so just bear that in mind, I guess. And as I say, all of these activities should feed into your overall picture of maths at your school, so keep updating that document as you go along. These are just some suggested headings. You can absolutely take this and adapt it for your school and your context. The other thing it should probably feed into is an action plan. Again, we have a template that you can use at Twinkl, but your school might provide you with a particular template that they want you to work to, or you might be part of a trust that has a particular template that they would like you to use, and that's absolutely fine. I always used to find that breaking it down into terms rather than weeks or even half terms was a more sensible, a more realistic approach. Having a clear focus for each term of the year. And as I said before, in autumn, it tended to be that gathering, that exploring, that trying to get a clear picture of what's been happening in maths. Develop your why and your vision for maths at your school. Prioritize then what you are going to do from your findings. Make sure it's based upon that data. And when I say data, I don't just mean the pupil assessment data. I mean all the things that you have found out from all the monitoring activities. Less is more. I was maths lead for about 15 years, and every single year I overplanned in my action plan. Every year I promised that I wouldn't overplan, and I still managed to. And at the end of each year, I get to look at my action plan and realize I still hadn't managed to tick off one or two items. So try to be realistic. Think about what time you have got to give to this, because in most cases you'll be a class teacher as well, or a deputy head or assistant head or something that is going to take your time. So try to be realistic with how much you can actually get done, and also how much you can ask your colleagues to do at any one time as well. We know workload remains an issue in school. And the last thing that we want to be doing is overburdening staff, even though we do want to, improve standards. Make sure it's a collaborative process with staff. Share the action plan with them. Take it to SLT. Make sure that you've got their buy-in and their support from it as well. That's really important. And then remember that change takes time. It's a process, and that you're not going to suddenly improve math standards in one single year necessarily. I would look at this as a process that might take 2 or 3 years really to begin to exact the sort of change that you want to see. When you are writing your action plan, I'm sure you're all familiar with SMART targets, making sure that they are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. We hear it so often, it starts to lose meaning. But do bear those things in mind. They are really important. Break it down as much as you can into easily identifiable and manageable steps with deadlines and responsibilities. I used to find if it didn't have a deadline, it didn't get done. So make sure that you add a deadline, and if somebody else is going to be doing this for you, or it's going to involve somebody else, share that deadline with them as well. Set milestones too. If it's a big focus, if it's a big task, if you're wanting to implement something like making sure that concrete manipulatives are used in every lesson from EYFS through to Key Stage 2, that's not going to happen just because you've done a staff meeting on concrete manipulatives. It's going to take time, and so therefore plan for that time. Make it a year-long project. Set milestones along the way that you can tick off, see as small wins, and also report back to the other stakeholders involved as well. Spot pitfalls early if you can. Often those come down to budget and time, might also come down to staffing and engagement and people's ability to engage with what you want to do. Always remember to be flexible. If you have to change things, it's not a failure. It's being an adaptable and flexible leader. So make sure that as circumstances shift, as they always do in schools, you never know what's going to happen next week, let alone next term. Just be willing to update the plan as you go along, and remember to monitor it regularly. Review, adapt, evaluate. It's a process. It's not ever going to be completed, ever, I'm afraid. So bear that in mind, see it as an ongoing process, and continue to monitor it as you go. This is what I've suggested as a monitoring and improvement cycle that you might want to use. You might have some additional steps. You might take this and begin to implement it for you in your school. But I used to look, whatever I was implementing, I didn't see this necessarily as a term or as a year. This could be 2 or 3 years. When we introduced Teaching for Mastery at my school, we saw that as a 5-year project, really, to make sure that it was fully embedded across school. And so this cycle would be something, this process would be something that we would go through regularly to make sure that we were on the right track. We talked about the gathering process. It's really important that you know why you want to do what you want to do, that you've explored it fully, and that you've brought everybody along with you. When you've done that, it's then a chance to reflect on that and decide what it is that you want to do and how you are going to do it. What have you got in place at school that can help you with that already? What might the potential barriers be? And what are your first steps going to be? And only when you've done those two things should you be actually looking to implement any changes or ask staff to do anything at all. It's really important as a leader that we're not asking staff to do things if we've not had a chance to properly prepare the ground for that work. In terms of your role as a maths lead, supporting staff is going to be a critical part of that. You should be looking to build relationships. I mentioned earlier about going around classrooms at the end of the day. I know it's hard when you've got books to mark and those sorts of things. It's not something you need to do every day. But popping your head into one or two classrooms at the end of the day and just saying, I just wondered how maths was today, or how are they getting on with whatever it is that you're learning at the moment, with fractions, with addition, whatever. It is a really nice way to just build relationships, build trust, and begin to have that professional dialogue. We can often focus too much on what's not working, but if you are able to share good practice and celebrate what's working well, I think that's a fantastic thing to do. And if you have a staff bulletin or newsletter or staff briefing, being able to share those wins can really help develop a positive culture around maths at school. Differentiate your support. Just as we look at within a class, sorry, to see who needs a bit of extra support or some further challenge, that's the same with staff as well. You may have an ECT that's just started this year who's going to need more support than a more experienced teacher, but it may not always just be about experience. So have a look and see where you can make a real difference. Be prepared, if you are comfortable, to model and co-teach some lessons. It's one of the best ways of implementing professional development, as far as I'm concerned. Planning as professional development as well, and actually having a planning session where you look at how you want to design lessons in your school. It's one of the, research shows it's one of the most effective forms of professional development. So definitely give that a go. Make sure that you are avoiding overload and keeping your changes small and focused, and make sure you're bringing everyone along with you on that journey. In terms of parental engagement, I did say that I would mention building a culture of positive talk around maths is really, really important. There was some research that I wrote about recently that suggested that children who came from households where their parents were not confident in maths and maybe had some maths anxiety, the children that came from that environment were typically, I think it was 20 months behind their peers, even into Key Stage 2. So it can make a real difference in terms of parental engagement. And if you find that you have children who are lacking in confidence or who perhaps don't talk positively about maths, that is likely to have come from somewhere, and it could well be parents. So if we can engage parents with positive talk around maths, then that's great. It's really difficult to do. So some of the ways that I've done that in the past is by having competitions and celebrating maths achievements in newsletters and things. Having open classrooms where we invite parents in just to see 10 or 15 minutes of a lesson. It needs to be managed carefully, but it's really effective in terms of building those positive relationships. And we found them to be more effective than running a workshop, really, on how we teach maths. Parents are more likely to come in if they get to see their child in a class than if they're going to be talked to about maths for an hour after school one night. So I'm not saying workshops are pointless by any means, but we found that engagement was much higher when we had open classrooms. Puzzles that can be sent home and completed at home as well. And then video explainers. For years as a maths lead, I wanted to create some videos that would explain the methods that we use to teach certain concepts at school. I never ever got round to it because time was so tight. Helpfully, Twinkl have got these for you. So there are video explainers on on every subject actually within maths that are there, and there's written articles as well on the Twinkl website. And again, I will share those links to you in the email that follows up from this session. Ofsted, don't panic, easier said than done. Obviously, we're going through some changes with the Ofsted framework at the moment, and the new framework is beyond the scope of this particular session, and certainly the time that we've got left to us now. So I'm not going to go through what an Ofsted might look like, but some things never change, and there is likely to be a focus on inclusion when Ofsted come into school. It's a big topic at the moment. It has been a big topic for years, and I can't see any reason why that wouldn't be the case next time they come to visit you in your school. They're also likely to ask you questions about curriculum design and pedagogy. So where you've got that maths vision and that maths at your school on one sheet, that is a really useful document to give them, and also to refer to yourself. That they'll ask you about the vision and the impact that might have on pupils. And again, that sheet is really useful to help back that up as well. Have some headline data that supports your viewpoint. In the previous framework, Ofsted inspectors shouldn't be looking at data. My personal view was that if I had some data that I wanted to show them, then I would make sure that I mentioned that, even if they didn't reference it later. Because if I had something I wanted to shout about, I made sure that they knew about it. And be confident in your successes. If there's something that you're working on, make sure that you acknowledge that as well. The inspectors, the inspection team should want to be confident in your leadership. And that means being aware of the things that you still need to develop, as well as the things that are working really well. So have all of that. I had a folder that I could refer to. I didn't often refer to the things in that folder, but it was nice to hold as a bit of a crutch. But just remember that you don't have to be the oracle on these things as well. And it's okay to not know something if you're able to go and find that out and go back to the team with it later. That should be absolutely fine as well. Be aware of which classes, if you're going to do a learning walk with them, be aware of which classes you definitely want to visit and who you want to show off. And just be aware that you don't need to know everything. There is also an Ofsted subject report that was published in 2023. It's already historical. It may not bear much reference to the new framework. Excuse me. But it is something that you should be aware of. It's called Coordinating Mathematical Success, and it is an overview of what they found from their subject review in 2023. So if you've not seen that as a maths lead, I would encourage you to have a look at it. In terms of resources, there are lots of national resources out there at the moment that you can make use of. I'm thinking about things like Maths Hubs. Make sure you sign up to your local Maths Hub, because they provide some brilliant CPD. And if nothing else, it's a network of other maths leads that you can go and talk to and ask questions of. At Twinkl, we also have the leaders team, and there's so many resources in the leaders team, resource files in there that you can make use of. I'm also going to just make reference to the Primary Maths podcast as well. If you're a maths lead and you're not listening to that already, it's my podcast that I run here at Twinkl. But it's I would say, and I know I would say this, but I would say it is a font of useful information and practical things that you can implement into your school as a maths lead and as a maths teacher. So that is just about it for this session. Thank you everybody for attending.